tell you about the next talk. It's going to be awesome. We're going to go back to the criminal's perspective to see how cyber criminals do things. And just imagine you're a cyber criminal. How do you decide which malware to go with? This is what the next speaker is going to tell us all about. Sergey, you can come and join me here. So please welcome Sergey Shykevich. Sergey is a threat intelligence leader for Q6 Cyber, and what he does all day, every day, is to monitor, analyze, and research criminal communities. So Sergey is going to show us how criminals decide which malware to use. Take it away, Sergey. Woo!
Hey, hello. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having me here.
Is this your first time?
Second. Yeah, I'm excited to be here on B-Side stage for a second time. And so, first of all, in short about me, I'm Director of Intelligence at Q6 Cyber. As Karen mentioned, what we do all the day is to understand how cyber criminals are working, what they are thinking, and to understand their point of view. We are dealing a lot with botnet data and different botnets and banking malware, payment card data, money mules, and the threat actors themselves to understand what they are doing, how they are thinking, and who they are. So what we will talk about it today, we will talk about malware, but that we know all that it's a basic and key part of any cybercrime operation and chain. But we will talk about it not from a perspective of researcher. We'll talk about it from perspective of underground, how cybercriminals view it. In the beginning, I will list you how they view the malware world, how they divide it, what types of malware are available in the underground, and then I will move to their consideration, how they choose what to use. And it's this perspective, in many cases, is quite different than what you see as the ones who research it. So what do we need to run a botnet operation? Malware is definitely one of the components of it, but it's not enough. As you see, there are 3 additional important components to run a successful botnet operation. It's a malware, it's a crypt. Crypt is an underground term for obfuscation of the malware file and making it fully undetectable by antiviruses. It's a very basic and important term in the underground, because otherwise, after 1-2 campaign, in 2-3 days, each malware will be detected by all the antivirus engines. The third part is the infrastructure, the C2 servers, this part, and the last part, and maybe the most complicated, is the traffic. Basically, how the cyber criminals get their victims, how they do the infection part. So those are the 4 parts that when cybercriminal starts his malware operation, botnet operation, he has to consider. He has to understand how he builds all these to one big operation. So I divide this world of malware in the underground to 2 or even 3 parts. First of all, it's a division between desktop malware and mobile. And in the desktop part, the most common division is between Fulltech malware and killers. While talking about the mobile malware, it's important to mention that in the cybercrime underground, it's solely Android malware. It almost doesn't exist in the cybercrime underground iOS malware. It's extremely rare. I would say almost to up not existent. Very rare. So what's the difference? What are the key features of those malwares, and why cybercriminals divide it and build all those? Here I listed only several of the key features. So Fulltech malware is basically a malware that has I would say in many cases, some will call it APT malware, that has all the capabilities like a common APT that operated by nation-state actors. It has a credentials grabber, it has a keylogger, cookie grabber, it is able to capture screenshots from the victim's machine, it has a VNC model, virtual network computing model, that allows cybercriminals to remotely connect to victim's machine and do all their, for example, fraud activity, account takeover activity from victim's machine, and web injections that I will talk in a bit. The stealers are much more common and much more basic. They have very basic capabilities like credentials grabbing. It allows cybercriminals to steal browser history, crypto wallets. That's something very common, to steal the files of cold crypto wallets from the desktop or folders of the infected machines, and cookie grabber. While the Android malware has quite different capabilities that also very lucrative to cybercriminals, but with Android it's not so simple, and I will show you it in several minutes why. But the main features of Android malware are SMS sending and interception. That's something cybercriminals like a lot. It's a keylogger, its ability to log the device, and overlays. So now I want to talk a bit what are web injections or overlays. As technologically, they are a bit different, but their goal is the same. The goal is to trick the user into entering certain sensitive information and giving it to cybercriminals. And what is required to use web injection on Fulltech malware or overlay on mobile malware? That the malware is already running on victim's machine, that there is already an infection. It's not like phishing or something like this. And those models make the Fulltech malware and mobile malware so lucrative for cybercriminals. How does it work? So here I want to provide you some example about how web injections work. The overlay from the conceptual perspective are relatively similar, but technologically they work different. So when the victim's machine is already infected, so when the victim visits a specific website that matches a pattern, for example, has the part Amazon, the keyword Amazon, so then what happens is manning the browser attack. And this web injection model injects HTML or JavaScript code to the content before it's rendered on the web browser. And what the user sees is basically a different page. It's a fake page of Amazon and not the original one. And mostly, it allows the cybercriminals to add additional fields and questions. For example, if the real Amazon page asks just for username and password, so using web inject, the cybercriminals will ask for username, password, and also for payment card number, CVV expiration, and maybe also some secret questions to bank account. That's kind of the trick, and that's why cybercriminals like so much to use it. Well, there are three main types of web injections. It's the basic ones that I described, those are information stealers, basically really to steal the information like I described to you. The second one is token interception, because think about it, it allows cybercriminals also to trick the users to enter also the secret code or one-time code, part of it, because most of the web injections are complicated and multi-staging. And in very kind of sophisticated cases, it's also what is called ATS, Automated Transfer System. That when a cybercriminal, for example, let's take now an example of bank account. When he tries to visit his real bank account, so he sees a fake page of the bank, provides his credentials, secret question and answer, and then this web injects automatically logins into account and conducts a transfer from his account in the same moment. And all this is built in. And that's why cybercriminals like it so much. So that's how web injections work. Overlays are pretty similar, just on mobile. So what's the offer of those? As you can see here, there are several types of Fulltech malware. Those are the most rare and complicated, and I will show you why. It's very easy to really be user of those. But the most common that I'm sure you heard about those is Trickbot, Dridex, Gauzy ISFB, Zloader, and others. Well, on the stealer parts, the offer is, I would say, huge. You see, there is Redline, Raccoon, Taurus, Vidar, Azorult, Predator the Thief, Oski, and other versions. And each one of those also has many forks. For example, Azorult that is already, let's say, a dead stealer, but it has a lot of different forks that's quite similar to Azorult. So the offer here is very wide of stealers, and why? Because basically the effort to build and develop a good stealer is 100 times less than to develop a good Fulltech malware. That's basically the reason. And on the mobile malware side, the offer is very limited, even less than Fulltech malware. It's Cerberus, Anubis, and Alien, while Cerberus source code was leaked a year and a half ago, so I would say most people do not use any more Cerberus. So it's even Anubis and Alien. The offer is very limited. Here you can see that many of the cybercriminals also having those discussions, what to choose, especially about the stealers, by the way, because the entry point to use a stealer is very low. You can see here from the real forums, which stealer to choose in 2021. Hello to all good people. I'm looking now and there are a lot of stealers, but I don't know which one is the best for hackers. Which one is the most relevant and causes the highest damage? A real post from a big Russian underground forum. And another one, which stealer is better? My goal is to use this in my landing page. Also, please write why one or another is better. What are the pros and the cons? There are a lot of discussions around it in the underground, what to use. Because there are a lot of consideration, and it's not easy for especially entry-level cybercriminals to choose what to use. Now let's talk about how they actually choose. Which one of those that I described you to use. Whether to use Fulltech malware, stealer, or mobile malware, and what to use inside each category. There are 4 main considerations what to use. The one is a monetization goal, why they want to use it. What's their goal? How they get the money in the end of the day. The second is availability. What is available and what can they get? The pricing. I will show you that the price ranges are very wide between different categories and malwares. And the business model and maintenance of the malware. Each malware vendor and developer has a different business model, how he sells it, how he maintains it, and what he provides to his clients. So the first consideration are the monetization goals. Each cybercriminal, when he starts his malware operations, he has a specific goal. What will he do with when he will infect the endpoint users? So I would say the least sophisticated and basic goals are mostly or to steal gaming accounts of Fortnite or any other stuff. It's very common, very popular. By the way, those accounts do not cost a lot in the underground, but it's easy and it provides money. To steal payment card and crypto wallets becomes a bit more difficult, mostly from a monetization perspective. While I'm saying monetization, it's what they now steal the account, what they do with it. Because it's not enough just when you steal payment card. You should be able to understand also how to use it, how to beat different anti-fraud controls of the bank and payment card companies. So that's what I mean by monetization. The more complicated monetization goals, and mostly they're applied to more sophisticated cybercriminals, are banking account, because mostly the anti-fraud controls and cybersecurity controls in banking accounts are much more sophisticated than, for example, in gaming industry. And even if you get the password for some account, it doesn't mean you will be able to log into the account and steal the money. You need much more. E-commerce merchants, there is a huge market for credentials to admin panel of e-commerce merchants, for passwords to Magento, open card panels. Why? Because cybercriminals can install different sniffers and this way steal payment cards on a scale. And maybe the most complicated monetization goal, those are the cybercriminals who infect with malware to get access to corporate networks. Because maybe it sounds great. You have now an access to big corporation, big bank. But now to monetize it, it's not so easy. Because mostly the controls there are pretty sophisticated. And many people, for example, cybercriminals deploy a ransomware. But also to deploy ransomware, you need a lot of knowledge, how you propagate in the network, how you identify the backups, and et cetera, et cetera. So that's, I would say, the most sophisticated goal of cybercriminals. And I would say the vast majority of the cybercriminals are not able to monetize corporate networks. Okay? Even they get access to some nice server in a big company or something, mostly they will sell it just. Because the monetization is very difficult. So that's a basic consideration when someone chooses what malware to use, what they will do with the victims. The second consideration is the availability. There is a very common term in the underground of public versus private. So what does it mean? public, it doesn't mean that you can find this malware on Google. What does it mean? Is that you can find the malware developer and just rent or buy the malware on the underground forums. It's easy, you just pay the money and you get the malware. While the term private, it means that developers and those who are behind the malware families are not in underground forums mostly, and you can't just find them and say, I'm paying now this amount of money and I'm getting this. That's the difference between those terms. So the second part of the availability for mostly the private malware is to understand who is the developer. Because, for example, if the malware is Trickbot, many people and many law enforcement and companies wish to know who exactly is the developer of Trickbot or Dridex and how to approach him. Here we come to the vetted approach. Even if you now get the jabber is a common mean of communication in Russian underground, even if you know the jabber of the developer of Trickbot, if you now just start a conversation with him and ask to be affiliate of Trickbot, he will just ignore you. He definitely will ignore you. He will ask you, who are you? Who recommended you? How you find my jabber? And how I know you are not working with law enforcement or cybersecurity companies. So you need also some very solid reputation, especially for Fulltech malware families like Trickbot and Dridex. You just can't, out of nowhere, come to the developer and get this malware. That's one of the reasons, by the way, why the fight with those malware families is so complicated, because also the developers and the people behind it are not, mostly are not in the forums. You can't find the information about what they are doing, how they are working, just passively collected in forums. You can see here several examples now of people looking for different malware families. So in the beginning, those are more the Fulltech malware, the more vetted and sophisticated malware. For example, someone is looking for Emotet owner. The Emotet is one of the common loaders of Trickbot that was taken down about 10 months ago, but he continues operating. The takedown was successful for several months, but the same, by the way, Trickbot. It was successful for several months, but it continues operating and maybe even on a higher scale than it was previously. So some cybercriminals in April this year looking for owner of Emotet and asked to send him private message. By the way, at least in this thread, no one answered him. Because most likely, even if the owner of Emotet and the developer will see it, he will not answer. The same about Gauzy ISFB. Another cybercriminal is looking for the developer of Gauzy ISFB and even specific version of Gauzy ISFB, the redeveloped version also. But no one answered him. The same, he wants to rent, but again, he needs someone who will recommend him to the developer of Gauzy ISFB, provide him with contact details, and then provide the vetting for him. On the other side, with the stealers, it's much more easier. There is relatively easy to find in different underground communities just threads of developers of stealers that just advertising it and offering it for the cyber criminals. You can see here a thread of Taurus stealer, a thread of Raccoon, a very common stealer last year that is running for since the beginning of 2019 and has about dozens of pages of people who are buying it. The same about thread of Redline. It's just a small effort, and the cybercriminals find the stealers, because those people who developed them, they just want to offer it to wide audience, let's call it this way. They do not vet, and anyone who pays for it will receive it and get it. And you can see here in the pricing, for example, Redline, $150 for a month. Relatively not expensive. I would like to talk a bit now on this point about mobile malware, because there is a huge demand of it, a lot of people talking about it. You can see here at least 4 different threads from last months about people talking about it, asking what's there. Cerberus is dead. What are alternative Android botnets? Is it possible to find anything there? Or another guy tells, all went private, due to the fact that it's impossible to create any more background services in most of the Samsung devices. So no one now offers really mobile malware in the underground. As I mentioned previously, only Alien, and mostly it's now even Alien, I would say it this way. But does it worth it? Are there a lot of really successful cybercriminals who operate mobile malware? From my experience, no. It's much more difficult to run successful campaign and operation of mobile malware than desktop ones. Mostly due to the infection vector. It's much more difficult to do infections on a high scale and on a wide scale. Because based on most of the mobile controls now, in the end of the day, you have to trick the end user, the victim, to download some application. And it's not very easy, in most cases, what we see. And even if the endpoint user, the victim, downloads it and is being infected, so the average lifetime of such victim is mostly less than 72 hours. Because mostly those malicious applications don't have real functionality. They are just malicious. And after several hours or a day or two, the victim understands, even if he doesn't understand he downloaded the malware, but he doesn't understand that the application he downloaded doesn't work as expected. So he just deletes it. And there is no live malware. Most of the mobile malware families we observed have dozens up to small hundreds of victims. While just for comparison, Trickbot last 4 years had about 5 million victims. Emotet has every year millions of victims. Stealers have thousands, in some cases tens of thousands of victims. It's very rare that a mobile malware or someone who runs it gets even to several thousand victims. It's rare. I won't say it never happens, but it's rare. The operation is very difficult, and many cybercriminals kind of see it lucrative, try it, and then understand that they are not able to do anything successful. Because in the end of the day, they need a live bot, victims that are infected for a long time mostly, and it doesn't happen. The third consideration is the price. And that's an important consideration, but I listed it as number 3, not the first and not the second. Most of the models have 2 types of pricing. One-time payment, just to be part of really the user or affiliate of specific malware, and then you pay on a monthly basis for updates, for such stuff. So the pricing is really on a huge range. When we start with Stealers or Taurus, Redline, Raccoon, it's mostly several $100s at most per month. When we go to mobile malware, it becomes more expensive. It can be $2,000 to $3,000 around this. Depends on which malware, who is the vendor. When we go to Fulltech malware, for example, one month of use of Ursnif, goes the ISFB, it's about $3,500. And on the other side, really expensive, but maybe the most sophisticated and successful malware on the market now is Trickbot. 1 month of use costs $153,000. Out of this, the one-time payment, just to start using it, is $150,000. Just to be affiliate, someone who is allowed to use Trickbot. And then every month, you pay between $3,000 to $5,000 to be a user of the Trickbot. It's very expensive, and most of the, let's call them entry-level cybercriminals, just even if they pass all the previous steps, like to get vetted approach, to understand who is the developer, they want to infect big networks, they just don't have such money. It's very expensive, and the users of Trickbot, all the cybercriminals who use it, they do know what they do. And they know how they will monetize it. Otherwise, they will not pay such a high sum just to be a user of this malware. Because mostly, the revenue of the users of Trickbot are in millions in months, or in some cases, even more. It starts from fraud, account takeover, and ELC transfer in big banks in Europe, in the US. And in some cases, one transfer they do. We observed several cases of $500,000 in one transfer, for example, successful transfer. They do all the big ransomware attacks, like Revil, like Egregor, and other, that in many cases, their ransom demand, it starts from several $1,000,000 up to $20, $25 million. So they know what they do. So they are able also to pay this rent fee. And the last consideration is the business model and maintenance. Different malware families and developers have different business models, what they sell. The most basic one and the least sophisticated, that most of the really serious cybercriminals will not use this model and will not rent malware under those conditions. It's one-time malware build. If you just receive one executable, you can run one campaign, and most likely after this campaign, it won't be relevant anymore. It will be detected by many antivirus engines. The second is malware build, support for specified time frame. For example, for months, 2, 3. And the essential part of this support is to keep the malware fully undetectable by engines. Mostly, cybercriminals, what they do, they use the same VirusTotal as we are using, or other similar engines, and run their build of the malware before they do a campaign and check how many antiviruses and security solutions sign and detect their build. That's what they are doing. So that's a key part that the vendor and the malware developer provide support, and mostly it's what I mentioned previously, crypt, obfuscation of the malware file. The bit more sophisticated part, it also includes new features, because there are a lot of demand for different stuff. For example, a year ago, most of the stealer and malware families didn't have a dedicated model to steal cold wallets of crypto. Now, almost each and every stealer has such models for specific cryptocurrencies. And the same Fulltech malware. That's, for example, a feature. So that's another subscription. And the more sophisticated and the interesting one is malware as a service and bots as a service. Malware as a service, basically when a developer provides a malware as part of malware as a service model, he provides the malware, the executable, the crypt, the support to keep the executable undetectable, and the infrastructure. He is the one who provides all the infrastructure of C2 servers. He's the one who maintains it. He's the one who changes it where required. He's the one who looks for bulletproof hostings, where to host it, and all this. Mostly, this model is common for Fulltech malware, but there are also some stealers like Vidar, for example, that provide it in partial model also. In this case, basically, the cybercriminals need much less knowledge, especially technological knowledge, to use the malware. The only thing he has to do is basically the traffic, to think how he infects. For example, spamming campaigns or different areas, other chains of infection. And the last model, the most sophisticated and maybe the coolest one for cybercriminals, but also the most expensive, is bots as a service. This model exists, I would say, ultimately and only with the Fulltech malware families, while the cybercriminal, the endpoint cybercriminals, orders not and pays not only for the malware crypt infrastructure, but he pays also for the traffic. And what he gets in the end of the day, he doesn't need to have any technological knowledge. He just gets a C2 panel with infected machines. That's what he gets, but he also pays accordingly. Mostly, for example, in some models of Ursnif, the cost of 1,000 bots victims is $20,000, for example. Some groups provide it. Because someone is doing all the work, all the difficult work, technological work, infection, and you get the bots. But many sophisticated cybercriminals work this way. So those are the main models and the ways. So before I summarize, I wanted to give you two short snapshots about how cybercriminals view what is ideal Android malware and what is the ideal stealer. Because there are also a lot of discussions about it, what cybercriminals really want to see in those malware families. So ideal Android malware mostly will include, at least from cybercriminals' perspective. By the way, I will tell in advance, I think such malware does not exist at all with all those capabilities. They would like to see modularity and minimum required functionality, because in this case, it will be much more difficult to detect it. They want hidden VNC that will allow remotely easily connect, and conduct any activity for malware for a victim's phone. Web index for payment cards. They want root permission capabilities of the malware. They want SMS sending and interception and anti-slip function. Such malware, as to my best knowledge, currently doesn't exist, and is especially publicly, is not offered in the underground. And I think maybe the most complicated part is root permission capabilities. From what is ideal stealer, it's much more simpler. The cybercriminals looking for sealers that will be fully undetectable all the time, will have high-quality logs parsing, admin panel with variety of filters, and the ability to grab cold wallets. As you can see, 2 out of the 4 features here connected to data mining. Currently, that's maybe one of the biggest obstacles of cybercriminals. They are able to get over most of other stuff, but their difficulty is how they mine all the big data, because some of the panels have hundreds of thousands of victims, millions of victims, billions of records. How to mine the data? That's the biggest obstacle now for cybercriminals. And just to summarize, so Fulltech malware is expensive, is mostly vetted or private, but it has a very sophisticated capabilities and very lucrative for seasoned cybercriminals. The stealers are cheap. There is a very wide offer of those, but their capabilities are pretty limited. And the mobile malware, there is very limited offer and low success rate. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you, Sergey. I have a question for you. What's your favorite malware? Blue. Blue? Blue? OK, I like the color. Thank you so much, Sergey. We appreciate it.